After Grandma passed, I found a small wooden box hidden behind her workshop cabinet. It was sealed shut, no key, no label, just one word carved deep into the lid, Mark. For months, I left it untouched. But the day I finally opened it, everything I thought I knew about my family collapsed. Because inside that box wasn't money or letters or keepsakes, it was proof that someone I loved had betrayed us all. And once I saw it, there was no going back. Grandma's house never really smelled like any other home. It wasn't cookies or perfume. It was the quiet sweetness of old wood, lemon polish, and the faint smoke of her workshop lamps. Every beam, every cabinet seemed to hum with time itself. When I was little, I used to press my palms against the carved edges of her furniture, tracing them like braille, as if I could read the stories hidden in the grain. Grandma always smiled when she caught me doing that. "Good hands learn before good eyes," she'd say, handing me a clean cloth to wipe dust off a frame. She believed antiques weren't meant to be owned. They were meant to be cared for, restored, remembered. She had this small ritual. Before touching any piece, she'd whisper, "Be gentle. It survived centuries just to meet your hands." To her, every object had a soul. To me, every moment with her felt like a lesson I didn't yet understand. My brother Mark didn't see it that way. Even as kids, he'd walk into Grandma's collection room with that glint, curiosity, but colder. He'd pick up a porcelain figurine, tilt it under the light, and say, "You think this is worth much?" Grandma would chuckle softly, "More than you can measure." But he'd already moved on to something else, scanning for what he could take apart. I didn't notice it then, but that difference, the way we looked at her treasures, was already drawing a line between us. As the years passed, the scent of polish grew fainter, replaced by antiseptic and medicine. Grandma's hands, once steady and strong, began to tremble. She'd forget where she put her tools, forget names, sometimes even faces. But she never forgot how to hold a brush. Even when her memory blurred, her fingers remembered the weight of wood and the rhythm of restoration. One evening, I came home early and found Mark standing in her workshop. He wasn't helping her. He was flipping through her inventory notebook, the one she guarded like scripture. When he saw me at the door, he smiled, closed it, and said, "Just making sure everything's accounted for." At the time, I thought nothing of it. I wish I had. Because that simple notebook, and whatever he took from it, would become the beginning of everything that fell apart. It happened quietly, so quietly that at first no one questioned it. Grandma's handwriting had grown shaky, her voice soft and uncertain. So when Mark announced that she'd taken care of her affairs, the family simply nodded, relieved. He said she'd signed a few legal documents, ensuring everything she loved stayed within the family. That's how he phrased it, within the family. What he really meant was within his hands. I remember the night he told us. We were all at dinner, the kind that's supposed to feel warm, laughter, clinking plates, but something about his tone chilled the room. He waited until the main course was over, then slid a stack of papers onto the table like he was revealing a magic trick. "Grandma's decided I should handle her collection," he said. "She wants to simplify things before, He smiled as if doing her a favor. I didn't understand what I was looking at, but the words exclusive ownership transfer burned themselves into my mind. I looked at Grandma. She was sitting quietly beside him, her hands trembling around her teacup. When our eyes met, she looked lost, like she wasn't sure why everyone was staring. Mark reached out, patted her shoulder, and she smiled, the way you smile when someone tells you everything's fine. I told myself it was just paperwork, that she must have understood. But somewhere deep down I already knew. She hadn't signed that out of choice. She'd signed it out of confusion and trust. After dinner, I stayed behind to help her to bed. She looked tired, older than I'd ever seen her. When I covered her with a blanket, she whispered something I almost didn't catch. "Did I do it right?" I froze. "Do what right, Grandma?" But her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow, lost in another time. That question haunted me for weeks. A month later, she was gone. The house felt hollow, not because she wasn't there, but because everything she'd loved had already been taken. Mark didn't waste time. Within days, he was cataloging, labeling, talking to appraisers, acting like the curator of a museum he didn't deserve. At the funeral, he gave a speech about preserving her legacy. The crowd clapped, I stood in the back, my nails digging into my palms, thinking about the trembling hand that had signed that paper. A signature that didn't protect her, it erased her. And I swore then, if she couldn't defend her name, I would. After the funeral, the house didn't feel like hers anymore. It was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that comforts you. It was the kind that echoes. Every sound bounced off empty walls, every shadow felt like something missing. Mark didn't stay long. He took what he called his inheritance and left before the flowers even wilted. A week later, the lawyer called. She said Grandma had left something for me, not in her will, but in her own handwriting, taped to a small wooden box. It wasn't money or jewelry. It was the key to her workshop. The workshop sat behind the house, a narrow shed with a window that always caught the morning light. When I pushed open the door, the smell hit me first: linseed oil, sawdust, old varnish, and time itself. Her tools were still laid out on the bench, just as she'd left them. Tiny brushes, brass handles, wooden clamps. And her notebooks, stacks of them, worn thin at the edges, filled with sketches, dates, and neat little notes in her looping handwriting. I stood there for a long time, running my fingers over the work table. The grain was smooth from years of her touch. It felt warm, like her hands had never really left. Days turned into weeks. I found myself returning every morning, sweeping the floor, sorting her tools, as if keeping the space alive might somehow bring her back. Then one afternoon, I opened one of her unfinished projects, a cracked jewelry box with a broken hinge. The kind of small thing she would have fixed in an hour. It felt wrong to leave it incomplete. So I tried. The first attempts were clumsy. The wood resisted me, splintering under too much pressure. But slowly, muscle memory returned. The motions she'd drilled into me as a child, steady hands, light touch, patience above all. When I finally fit the hinge and closed the lid, it clicked perfectly into place. For a moment, I just stared at it. It was more than a box. It was proof that she was still teaching me. That night, I placed the box back on the workbench, lit one of her old lamps, and whispered her words to the empty room. Be gentle. It survived centuries just to meet your hands. And that's when I realized maybe what she left me wasn't just her tools or her craft. Maybe she left me the way back to her, and the strength to make things right. It started with a rumor. Someone mentioned, almost casually, that Mark had been meeting with an appraiser. For insurance purposes, they said. But something about that didn't sit right with me. Grandma's collection wasn't just old furniture. It was irreplaceable history. Why would he need an appraisal unless he was planning to sell? I told myself not to care. I told myself to let it go. But one night, while I was cleaning her workshop, I found a folded note tucked inside one of Grandma's notebooks. It was an old receipt from a local appraisal office dated just a week before her death. And it wasn't addressed to her. It was addressed to Mark Vance. A cold feeling settled in my chest. I called the office the next morning, pretending to be following up on a misplaced file. The woman on the line hesitated before lowering her voice. Oh, that appraisal? I think Mr. Vance already received his copy. She paused. But you didn't hear this from me. Something about it felt off. The numbers didn't make sense. 2 days later, I had it in my hands. A copy of the official appraisal, printed on crisp letterhead, stamped and signed. At first glance, it looked legitimate. Detailed item lists, estimated market values, condition grades. But the moment I compared it to Grandma's handwritten notes, the lies started whispering. Her prized Empire-style desk, the one she'd told me was from 1820, was listed as a modern reproduction mid-20th century. A Qing dynasty vase described as common 19th century export ware. The Chippendale chair, her pride, valued at less than a cheap replica. Every line was a distortion, careful, strategic, intentional. It wasn't just carelessness. It was manipulation. Someone had rewritten her legacy in ink and numbers. I stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. It was neat, elegant, but something about it nagged at me. The loops, the slant, the spacing. I'd seen it before. In Mark's handwriting. My throat went dry. I pulled out an old birthday card he'd written years ago, the one that said, "To my favorite sister, don't sell my gifts on eBay." The handwriting was identical. Same pen pressure. Same flourish on the M. I sat there for a long time, the paper trembling between my fingers. The room was silent except for the hum of the lamp. And for the first time I heard it, the faint whisper of deceit that had been echoing through this house long before I'd ever noticed. I didn't sleep that night. The image of that forged signature burned behind my eyes every time I blinked. It wasn't just greed anymore, it was deliberate deception. He hadn't only stolen from her, he'd rewritten her truth. So I did what Grandma had always taught me, start with what's broken and work backward. Her notebooks became my map. I spread them across the workshop table, each one filled with sketches, notes, and tiny observations only she would notice. Wood grain directions, firing marks on porcelain, artisan initials carved beneath paint. Every detail was a breadcrumb. And for every lie in Mark's appraisal, Grandma had already left me the truth. The deeper I went, the clearer the pattern became. Dozens of pieces undervalued, mislabeled, intentionally misdated. It wasn't incompetence, it was strategy. Someone had manipulated the numbers just enough to make the collection appear worthless, so no one would question when he claimed it for himself. Days blurred into nights. I built a spreadsheet cross-referencing every item in Grandma's notes against real auction archives. I read until my eyes ached, drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago. But I couldn't stop. Because with every corrected date, every restored name, I felt like I was putting her spirit back together. Restoration, but this time not of wood and metal. Of truth. Eventually the pieces connected. The appraiser Mark had hired, Gregory Langford, wasn't a stranger to controversy. Online forums whispered about creative valuations, inflated reports, and clients who mysteriously profited after mistaken documentation. His name appeared in 3 separate lawsuits, all quietly settled. And one of them had a signature that looked eerily familiar. I gathered everything, screenshots, archived records, even emails between Langford's office and Mark's address. He'd used a private email under the name MV Consulting, his initials barely disguised. The arrogance was almost poetic. When I finally printed the report, it was nearly 50 pages thick. Tables, photos, notes. Every page a piece of her honor stitched back together. It was beautiful in a strange, tragic way, like watching a broken vase return to shape, but knowing you can still see the cracks if you look close enough. At one point, exhaustion hit me, and I sat at her workbench, my head in my hands. Am I destroying what's left of my family, I thought? But then I remembered Grandma's voice, calm, patient, steady. The wood never lies, she used to say. Only people do. That was enough. I wasn't destroying a family. I was restoring its truth. There's a strange kind of silence that comes before a storm, not the silence of peace, but of something holding its breath. That's what the house felt like that week. I hadn't told anyone what I'd found. Not the forged appraisal. Not the fake email. Not even the lawsuits I'd uncovered. The truth was a loaded weapon, and I was still deciding if I had the strength to pull the trigger. Every time I walked past a photo of Grandma, guilt twisted inside me. Her smile seemed to ask, "Are you sure this is what I would have wanted?" And maybe that's what haunted me most. The fear that seeking justice might make me just like him, ruthless, selfish, unforgiving. I tried to distract myself by working in the workshop, but even the comfort of sawdust and varnish couldn't quiet my thoughts. The same hands that once restored beauty were now building a case that could tear my family apart. The irony wasn't lost on me. One night, I stared at the printed report, 50 pages of evidence, spread across the table like an autopsy of trust. I ran my fingers over the paper edges until they stung. I thought about Grandma's words, the last ones she ever said that still echoed clearly in my head. Take care of what's fragile. Once it breaks, you can't always fix it. I wanted to believe she meant antiques. But maybe she'd been talking about us. Sleep didn't come. Instead, I sat in the dark, replaying every memory. Mark teaching me to ride a bike, sneaking me candy, laughing until we cried. And then, that same laugh echoing over Grandma's grave, talking about insurance and paperwork. 2 versions of him colliding in my head. Which one was real? By dawn, the decision had been made. The guilt didn't fade, it simply hardened into resolve. Because this wasn't just about him. It was about her, about truth, about the kind of legacy worth protecting, even if it meant losing everything else. I gathered the pages, clipped them together, and placed them neatly in a folder. My hands didn't shake. For the first time in weeks, they were steady, just like hers used to be. Tomorrow I would sit across from the man who once called me sister, and I would show him exactly what those hands had built. The meeting was held at our family lawyer's office, a sterile room lined with mahogany shelves and framed certificates that suddenly felt like silent witnesses. The air smelled faintly of coffee and tension. Mark sat across from me, arms folded, the faintest smirk tugging at his mouth. He thought I was bluffing. He always did. Our lawyer, Ms. Pearson, began softly. Thank you both for coming. I understand there are discrepancies concerning the appraisal documents. Her voice was neutral, professional, but her eyes flicked toward me, an unspoken cue. It was time. I opened my folder. Page after page slid onto the table, side-by-side comparisons, valuations, photographs, signatures. I didn't need to raise my voice. The paper spoke for itself. This, I said, pointing to the appraisal, was filed under Mark Vance's request 1 week before Grandma's death. And this, I held up another sheet, is the signature of Gregory Langford, the appraiser. I paused. Except it isn't. Mark shifted, his smirk faltering. I placed a scan of the real signature next to the fake. The difference was subtle, to the untrained eye, invisible. But to someone who'd spent her life restoring precision, it screamed. That's ridiculous, he said, scoffing. You're not an expert. No, I replied quietly. I'm something worse. I'm family. For a second, the room seemed to contract. Even Ms. Pearson stopped taking notes. I flipped to the next page, emails between Mark's alias and Langford's office, arranging payments for revised documentation. Her pen froze midair. He reached forward to snatch the paper, but she was faster. Mr. Vance, she said firmly, you realize falsifying appraisals for financial gain is a serious offense? His face drained of color. It's not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like, I cut in. Grandma didn't give you her collection. You took advantage of her. And when that wasn't enough, you rewrote her history to make it look like she never cared. The silence that followed was suffocating. Only the faint ticking of the wall clock filled the space. Ms. Pearson leaned back, exhaling. The fraudulent appraisal will be voided. The estate documents will be reviewed. And under these findings, your ownership claim is invalid. Mark didn't move. His jaw clenched so tightly that I could hear the faint grind of his teeth. When he finally looked up, his voice was quiet, too quiet. You think you've won? He leaned forward, eyes burning. You'll regret this. I didn't answer. I just closed the folder, stacked it neatly, and whispered, more to myself than to him, I already did. The days after the meeting felt like the air itself had thinned. Every breath came heavy, as if the house was holding its breath too, waiting to see what would happen next. I had exposed the truth, but the truth doesn't always set you free. Sometimes it just leaves you standing in the wreckage, wondering if it was worth the cost. 2 days later, Ms. Pearson called. Her voice was calm, steady, almost kind. Mark's claim has been officially voided, she said. There will be legal procedures, but you've done the hard part. I thanked her, but when I hung up, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. It wasn't relief, it was something colder. The kind of emptiness that follows after you win a war and realize you've lost your home. Word spread fast. Cousins, uncles, family, friends, everyone had an opinion. Half called me brave. The other half called me cruel. Family should forgive, one message read. Why humiliate your own brother, said another. No one asked what Grandma would have wanted. No one cared how much it cost to carry this alone. I stopped answering calls. The silence was easier than defending myself. Instead, I spent my days in the workshop, sweeping the dust, polishing her tools, pretending she might walk in at any moment and ask what I was working on. The smell of linseed oil lingered in the air, familiar and safe, the only thing that hadn't turned against me. One afternoon, I noticed something I'd missed before. Tucked between 2 stacks of notes was a small envelope with my name written in her hand. Inside was a single sentence on yellowed paper. Keep restoring, not just things, but people. I sat there for a long time, clutching that note, tears falling before I even realized they were there. Because she'd known. Somehow she'd known this moment would come. The moment where restoration would mean letting go of what's broken, even if it's family. That night I finished her last project, the wooden frame she'd labeled almost done. I sanded the corners, wiped away the dust, and watched the grain glow under the lamplight. When I placed it on the windowsill, the sunset hit it just right, turning it gold for a few seconds before the room dimmed again. It was like watching her breathe one last time. A week later, Ms. Pearson called again. "The museum approved your request," she said softly. "They'll display the collection under her name, the Eleanor Vance collection." I didn't speak. I just looked at that glowing frame, and for the first time in months, my chest didn't ache. Because her name was finally safe. The museum was quieter than I expected. No fanfare, no cameras flashing, just the low hum of voices echoing against marble floors. Still, it felt like every sound carried a heartbeat. After months of silence, that soft murmur was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. I walked through the glass doors, the smell of polished stone and fresh paint mixing with something older, something that reminded me of Grandma's house. Maybe it was the varnish. Maybe it was memory. There it was, centered beneath the gallery lights, a plaque engraved in bronze. The Eleanor Vance collection. Her name gleamed under the spotlight, each letter shining like it had waited its whole life to be seen. I stood still for a long moment. People moved around me, whispering admiration about the craftsmanship, the preservation, the beauty of what had survived. But I wasn't listening to them. All I could hear was her voice, gentle and amused. "Be gentle. It survives centuries just to meet your hands." I smiled without meaning to. The words that had once felt like a lesson now felt like a homecoming. The pieces were arranged exactly as she'd dreamed, the Chippendale chair restored and upright, the Qing Dynasty vase, its glaze catching light like liquid fire, the Empire-style desk, elegant and proud. Everything she had loved, everything he'd tried to bury, was standing in the open, undeniable. A young curator approached me, early 20s, bright-eyed, holding a notepad. "Are you family?" she asked. "Yes," I said. Her eyes lit up. "She must have been extraordinary." "She was," I whispered, "and she still is." The girl smiled, then excused herself to greet new guests. I watched her walk away and thought about how legacy works, how it moves forward quietly, finding new hands to hold it. Near the exit, a reporter stood with a microphone, scanning the crowd. When he saw me, he smiled. "Excuse me, are you related to Mrs. Vance?" I hesitated, then nodded. He lifted his mic. "After everything that's happened, do you think it was worth it?" For a moment, I looked back at the room, at the shining wood, the soft laughter, the echoes of a name reborn. "Yes," I said simply. Because truth deserves to be seen. As I turned to leave, the camera light faded behind me. The last thing I saw was the plaque, her name glowing under the gallery lights. And for the first time since she'd gone, I didn't feel like I'd lost her. I felt like she'd finally come home. Morning light spilled through the workshop window, warm and golden, the kind that makes even dust look like something holy. The room smelled just the same as it always had, linseed oil, wood, and thyme. But today, it didn't smell like loss. It smelled like beginnings. The museum still called sometimes, asking for insights, stories, little details about Grandma's methods. And each time I'd walk to the workbench, run my fingers along her tools, and answer softly. She believed every mark had a memory. They'd always pause, then say, "That's beautiful." I never told them she was talking about people, not furniture. These days, I take on small restoration projects. Not for profit, just for peace. A broken music box? A cracked picture frame? A chair missing a leg? Sometimes the owners come to pick them up with tears in their eyes, whispering, "It looks just like before." And I always smile because I know that's never true. Nothing ever looks just like before. But it can be whole again. And that's enough. Mark hasn't spoken to me since the hearing. Sometimes I wonder if he ever looks at the news articles, the museum features, the photographs of Grandma's collection shining under her name. If he feels regret. If he feels anything. But I don't linger there. Restoration isn't about revenge. It's about returning what's real. I've learned something Grandma never said out loud, but always lived by. Forgiveness isn't giving someone another chance. It's refusing to let their damage define you. When you restore something broken, you don't erase the cracks, you highlight them. You make them part of the story. Because perfection isn't the goal. Truth is, I look down at my hands, steady now, sure, stained with varnish and memory. The same hands that once trembled with anger now move with purpose. I think of Grandma's voice, soft and certain. Be gentle. It survived centuries just to meet your hands. She was right, and maybe so was I. Because in the end, it wasn't just her antiques I restored. It was her name, her story, and somehow my own. So if you're watching this and there's something in your life that feels broken, don't throw it away. Take a breath. Touch it gently. You might be surprised what still remembers you. This was The Hands That Remember, a story from the Heartless Revenge channel, where every scar tells the truth it once tried to hide. If this story touched you, I'd love for you to stay, because the next story might just touch you deeper.